people did not seek that war either, nor did the United States. Over the past year, including the days immediately following October the 7th, I directed the U.S. military to flow assets and capabilities into the region, including aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and sophisticated air defense battery to defend Israel and deter our common enemy at critical moments. Since the war with Hezbollah began, over 70,000 Israelis have been forced to live as refugees in their own country, helplessly watching their homes, their businesses, their communities as they're bombarded and destroyed. And over 300,000 Lebanese people have also been forced to live as refugees in their own country. In a war imposed on them by Hezbollah. All told, this has been the deadliest conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in decades. How many of Hezbollah's senior leaders are dead, including its longtime leader, Nasrallah? And Israel has destroyed Hezbollah's terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon as well, including miles of sophisticated tunnels, which were prepared for an October 7-style terrorist attack in northern Israel. But lasting security for the people of Israel and Lebanon cannot be achieved only on the battlefield. And that's why I directed my team to work with the governments of Israel and Lebanon to forge a ceasefire, to bring the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to a close. Under the deal reached today, effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed, well, I emphasize, will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army and state security forces will deploy and take control of their own territory once again. Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon will not be allowed to be rebuilt. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities and begin to rebuild their homes, their schools, their farms, their businesses, and their very lives. We're determined this conflict will not be just another cycle of violence. And so the United States, with the full support of France and our other allies, has pledged to work with Israel and Lebanon to ensure that this arrangement is fully implemented, the agreement totally implemented. You know, there will be no U.S. troops deployed in southern Lebanon. This is consistent with my commitment to the American people to not put U.S. troops in combat in this conflict. Instead, we, along with France and others, will provide the necessary assistance to make sure this deal is implemented fully and effectively. Let me be clear. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense consistent with international law, just like any country when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction. At the same time, this deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon, a country that I've seen most of over the years, a country with rich history and culture. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past. And just as the Lebanese people deserve a future of security and prosperity, so do the people of Gaza. They too deserve an end to the fighting and displacement. The people of Gaza have been through hell. Their world's absolutely shattered. Far too many civilians in Gaza have suffered, far too much. And Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief. Over the coming days, the United States will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. With the hostages released and the end of the war without Hamas in power, that becomes possible. As for the broader Middle East region, today's announcement brings us closer to realizing the affirmative agenda that I've been pushing forward during my entire presidency. A vision for the future of the Middle East where it's at peace and prosperous and integrated across borders. A future where Palestinians have a state of their own, one that fulfills its people's legitimate aspirations, one that cannot threaten Israel or harbor terrorist groups with backing from Iran. A future where Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal measures of security, prosperity, and yes, dignity. To that end, the United States remains prepared to conclude a set of historic deals with Saudi Arabia, to include a security pact and economic assurances, together with a credible pathway for establishing a Palestinian state and the full normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a desire they both have. I believe this agenda remains possible, and in my remaining time in office, I'll work tirelessly to advance this vision for an integrated, secure, and prosperous region, all of which strengthens America's national security. Getting all this done will require making some hard choices. Israel has been bold on the battlefield. Iran and its proxies have paid a very heavy price. Now Israel must be bold in turning tactical gains against Iran and its proxies into a coherent strategy that secure Israel's long-term safety and advances a broader peace and prosperity in the region. Today's announcement is a critical step in advancing that vision, and so I applaud the crazy decision made by the leaders of Lebanon and Israel to end the violence. It reminds us that peace is possible. Say that again, peace is possible. As long as that is the case, I will not for a single moment stop working to achieve it. God bless you all, and sorry to keep you waiting so long. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Mr. President, will you get a ceasefire in Gaza before leaving office?
Ask me how I get a ceasefire, and I think so. Hold on, praying.
How is this push any different from the previous ones?
Noticing that should be reported. What?
Mr. President, what have you told the new administration?
Leaders of Lebanon and Israel to end the violence. It reminds us that peace is possible. Say that again, peace is possible. As long as that is the case, I will not for a single moment stop working to achieve it. God bless you all, and sorry to keep you waiting so long. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Mr. President, will you get a ceasefire in Gaza before leaving office?
Ask me how I get a ceasefire, and I think so. Hold on, praying.
How is this push any different from the previous ones?
Noticing that should be reported. What?
Mr. President, what have you told the new administration?
President Biden there delivering remarks from the White House Rose Garden on Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. For more, let's bring in our Jay O'Brien, also our White House correspondent Karen Travers, and our foreign correspondent Tom Soufi-Burridge. Tom, let's go ahead and start with you and talk about what a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah would mean for the region.
Yeah, Kira, I think the main headline to come out of President Biden's address is the fact that this ceasefire, as expected, will take effect in a matter of hours. In just over 5 hours from now, I calculated about 4 a.m. Local time in Israel and Lebanon. And it will, as expected, require a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. We learned from the IDF today that they conducted an operation as far as the Litani River. That's as far north as Israeli forces have operated in the last 2.5 months since they really escalated their attacks on the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that will be the requirement for Hezbollah to basically withdraw north of the Litani River, that key kind of landmark geographically. And President Biden also alluded to the Israeli concern that Hezbollah might continue to attack, and he was very keen to underline, we know that this has been a sticking point in the negotiations. The Israelis have basically been seeking reassurances from the United States and its allies, and France as well, key in this, as we heard from President Biden, that Israel would have the right to strike back at Hezbollah if there are breaches of that ceasefire. We also, I don't think, really learned, I mean, there was President Biden alluded to the fact that the United States and France will be involved in providing some form of assistance in terms of monitoring the ceasefire. Not US troops on the ground, of course, in Lebanon. That was not on the table. President Biden ruling that out completely. But we just don't know at this stage, I think, exactly how the US will be involved in trying to make sure that this ceasefire is implemented on the ground.
And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now saying that with U.S. President Joe Biden, he shows gratitude, thanks him for the U.S. involvement in achieving this ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, and for the understanding that Israel will maintain freedom of action in its enforcement. So, Karen, let's talk about that. We just heard President Biden there in the Rose Garden saying that, matter of fact, the quote was, if Hezbollah breaks the deal, Israel can do what it needs to do to defend itself. Clearly, the Biden administration has been helping to broker these talks. So I guess now, as we look at what this ceasefire deal means in Lebanon, what could it mean for the future of Gaza?
I think that's the big question, Kira, and unfortunately I'm going to have to keep it short. They're trying to clear the Rose Garden now so that the president can depart in just a couple of seconds. But just to answer your question there, I mean, the president talked about that at the end of his remarks, saying, you know, that the people of Gaza also deserve prosperity and security that he thinks that the people of Lebanon will now achieve because of this ceasefire agreement. He said that the United States will continue pushing for a ceasefire deal in Gaza, working with Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar in the coming days to try and get that across the finish line. He said right now that the Middle East is closer to what he thinks is his broader agenda, what he's been trying to work for during his presidency. But Kira, this has been a very difficult thing for this administration to try and get achieved. They have gotten close before, only to see talks fall apart between Israel and Hamas. But the president there talking about how this is a significant priority, saying Hamas, though, has refused to negotiate. And the only way out for them at this point, though, is to release the hostages and agree to a ceasefire.
All right, Karen Travers, thank you. I know you've got to. Yes, I know you got to get the heck out of there quickly. All right, we know what it's like when the president has to depart. All right, Jay, you know, what does this mean for Trump? Is this a nice little gift wrapped up with a bow and handing it over to the president-elect? I mean, he has talked about in day one of office that he would end these wars overseas. What does this mean for the president-elect?
I mean, it's a mixed bag for Trump. Certainly, it's an achievement that Donald Trump doesn't have to do if he were to get into office. As you have said, his stated goal is to end both the war in the Middle East and also the war in Ukraine on day one, he has said. That's a tall order. It remains to be seen if he'd even be able to pull that off. But it leaves Trump with a few things that he still has to grapple with. First, this ceasefire in Lebanon, as Tom pointed out, it's going to take some time for, as the plan is, Hezbollah not to be able to rebuild, the Lebanese army to come in and make sure of that, and the Israeli army to withdraw. And so if some of that bleeds into January, when Donald Trump will take office in late January, it's going to be up to the Trump administration to oversee that in some form or fashion, although Biden is committed to no U.S. boots on the ground in order to pull that off. And we would imagine, given Trump's worldview, that would be something he would try to continue. And it also, as Karen mentions, leaves leaves the idea of Gaza still up in the air. President Biden just there saying that they're going to try to take another whack at restarting ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas using the U.S. and various other regional partners like Egypt. Again, if those talks bleed into late January when Donald Trump takes office, it's up to the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, to absorb those talks if they're still continuing, try to push them over the goal line. And look, this is going to be an administration with a much different worldview, with a Trump who is close to Netanyahu personally, who has said he has unabashed support for Israel. So if those talks continue, the tenor of them, if Donald Trump were to take them over, could totally change.
Jay O'Brien, Karen Travers, Tom Sufi Burridge, thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. A lot more, including today's top headlines after a quick break.